Sound came into being when men wished to distinguish it from noise, the former being regarded as pleasant and the latter as unpleasant. This distinction, in turn, has been set aside by modern music, which is prepared to consider that even noise can be music. Many millennia were to pass, however, before the science of acoustics was able to provide an exact definition of this basic distinction. Noise was called an acoustic phenomenon, devoid of constant frequency and intensity, whereas sound is a similar phenomenon whose intensity, pitch, and duration can be measured. Pitch, or frequency, is concerned with tone. That is to say, the gradation between low and high notes. Pitch, or frequency, is measured in periods, also called hertz. These correspond to the number of vibrations emitted per second. Theoretically speaking, there is no limit to the amount of periods that can be emitted. In practice, however, the range of the human ear is confined to frequencies between 20 to 30 and 16,000 to 20,000 hertz. Intensity deals with the strength of a sound. In practical terms, the gradations run from less than pianissimo to more than fortissimo. Duration, of course, is the time during which a given sound is emitted. A musical sound is also judged by its timbre, or color, i.e. the characteristics it acquires from its source. It is this quality that enables us to tell whether a sound is being given out by a violin or a drum. These theoretical principles were naturally unknown to primitive man. Even so, he was instinctively aware of them when he created the language of sound. According to the historians, the language of sound came into being at more or less the same time as the language of speech. It drew its origin from the need to produce signals marked by rhythm, using shouts or various kinds of beating and percussion. In other words, means of communication whose range was greater than that of the normal level of the human voice. It is generally agreed that vocal music grew out of shouting, and instrumental music from beating of the hands. The first organization of this language of sound was of a rhythmical nature. The pattern of the rhythm, in fact, formed the code used for communication. Subsequent organization was tonal. Together with rhythm, this has laid the foundations of every further development, i.e. of music itself. Three stages can be distinguished in the history of this slow development. The first goes back to the days of the hunters. At that time, the language of sound was shaped in shouts and cries. Its rhythms were undefined, and it was still a matter of personal expression. The second stage sees man as a shepherd. Along with the organization of his animal husbandry, his sound language acquired more developed forms. There was a clearer definition of its rhythm and its first communal expressions. The third stage coincides with the advent of agriculture. In other words, with the giving up of nomadism on the part of the tribe. Stable settlement paved the way for the growth of music. Defined rhythms and melodies expressed in a communal form already marked special moments in the rituals of a family or the community. This music reveals that man had already discovered by instinct, or at any event knew how to exploit, that which the science of acoustics would later call fundamental sound and its respective harmonics, the harmonic and the respective tonic range. Sound, in fact, especially when it is produced by a stringed instrument, is always a complex of sounds, composed of the fundamental sound and its so-called harmonics, these being whole multiples of the fundamental. Harmonic sounds, too, are spaced by intervals. Their basic unit is the whole tone, which has its own multiples and submultiples. Intervals, in their turn, confer substance on the harmonic range, in other words, on the musical scales and their tonality. The earliest civilizations, those of Mesopotamia, China, India and Egypt, were very quick to transform into theory the notions concerning sound that prehistoric man had acquired by intuition. The Sumerians, for example, understood harmonics well enough to devise a basic set of 4 sounds, and one consisting of 3. Taken together, these formed the heptachord, or 7-note scale. The Chinese, on the other hand, started from what they regarded as the lowest note, called the yellow bell, and devised 12-note scales. The Indians were more complicated. Their base was an octave, divided into 22 intervals, known as shruti. Little is known about Egyptian music. It is assumed that pentaphonic, i.e. 5-note scales were employed. The Occidental scale grew out of Greek musical theory, which organized sounds on the basis of the tetrachord, namely 4 conjoined descending sounds. The first musical scales, therefore, were the expressions of different cultures. The same is true of their development. Even today, it is true to say that every people has its own music. Music as we know it in the West today, for example, is based on an octave divided into 12 semitones, and even into further fractions that are carried as far as a sixth of a tone in some modern compositions. This science of sound, however, must be established in some way, so that it can be applied, in other words, put into practice, and, even more important, so that it can be repeated. Notation, therefore, or the writing down of music, was devised. The first to reduce music to a written form were the Babylonians. It is the Greek system, however, that has survived in the greatest detail. The Greeks made use of letters of the alphabet, written either upright, horizontally, or upside down. Like scales, notation passed through a long period of complex development. The musical staff, consisting of 4 lines worked out by Guido d'Arezzo, did not appear until the 11th century. Even so, another 600 years passed before Western music had a unified system. In the 17th century, in fact, the 5-line staff and oval notes showing both the frequency and duration of each sound were adopted. Frequency was indicated in 2 ways: by the clef and the position of the note on the staff. Variations were shown by means of accidentals: sharp and double sharp, flat and double flat, natural and double natural. Duration was made clear by the shape of the note, in accordance with a decreasing progression by halves, starting from the semibreve. This was taken as the musical unit. The notation could also be enriched with information concerning the intensity of the sound, such as forte, i.e. loud, and piano, soft, etc., and dynamic indications concerning changes in intensity, such as crescendo and diminuendo, or expression, such as legato, staccato, and so on. The birth of dodecaphonic music, and now electronic music, has brought about a further revolution in notation, as well as in the way sound is employed. Notes have given way to new graphic signs, still in search of a common language. Indeed, the music they express also shows that this art is continuing its fascinating journey.